On December 28, 2025, French screen legend Brigitte Bardot passed away at her home in Saint-Tropez at the age of 91. This is the story of how a 1950 sex symbol became one of the most controversial figures in modern history, a woman who spent more than half her life fighting for animals while also facing serious accusations that overshadowed her legacy. Brigitte Bardot lived one of the most contradictory lives in entertainment history. A global icon and symbol of French beauty and freedom who ended her days as a convicted racist, she'd faced legal consequences 5 separate times. Somehow, these two sides of her story matter equally when trying to understand who she really was. Let's break down how the woman who gave the world and God created woman ended up spending the last 52 years of her life fighting a very different battle. Born on September 28, 1934 in Paris, France, Brigitte Anne-Marie Bardot would become known to the world simply as Bibi, initials that also spelled out bébé, the French word for baby. The coincidence was almost too perfect because the world would forever see her as something both innocent and wildly desirable at the same time. Wealth surrounded her from birth, with the family living in the luxurious 16th arrondissement of Paris. Louis Bardot was her father, Antoinette her mother, and Marie Janine her only sister. The household was traditional Catholic by all accounts, but Brigitte herself was anything but traditional. Ballet training at the National Superior Conservatory of Paris for music and dance consumed her early years, and by 15 years old, still just a teenager, her face already graced the cover of Elle magazine. That was May 8, 1950, when the world was already paying attention to this 15-year-old girl. The film debut came in 1952 with a movie called Crazy for Love, but that wasn't the breakthrough. 4 years later, in 1956, everything changed with a film called And God Created Woman, directed by her husband at the time, Roger Vadim, whom she'd married back in 1952. Their partnership would create one of the most iconic films of the decade. Paris saw And God Created Woman in 1956, but American screens didn't get it until 1957, and the film sparked immediate controversy. Nudity at a time when mainstream audiences found that genuinely shocking made headlines, but more importantly, it turned Brigitte Bardot into a superstar overnight. The film was actually her 17th, but people remember it as the moment she truly arrived on the world stage. By the early 1960s, Bardot had transformed into a global phenomenon. At the height of her fame in 1969, the French government chose her face to be the official model for Marianne, the national symbol of the French Republic. Think about that for a moment, because her face literally became the face of an entire nation, appearing on French postage stamps, on coins, and government buildings across the country. President Charles de Gaulle himself declared that Brigitte Bardot was a French export as significant as Renault cars. The film career spanned approximately 47 films and more than 60 recorded songs. Notable works included The Truth in 1960, A Very Private Affair in 1962, and Contempt in 1963. Directed by legendary filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard, nominations for major international awards followed, and the woman was gorgeous, talented, and seemingly untouchable. And that's when, in 1973, at just 39 years old, she walked away from it all. Behind the glamour lived a woman in serious pain. Severe depression plagued Brigitte Bardot throughout her entire life, manifesting in ways that were genuinely life-threatening. Multiple suicide attempts marked her private years. September of 1983 brought one particularly harrowing incident on her 49th birthday, no less, when she ingested sleeping tablets with red wine at her Saint-Tropez home before walking to a nearby beach. Someone found her and got her to safety, and doctors pumped her stomach at a local clinic in just one of several attempts on her own life. A 2025 documentary called Bardot, released just months before her death, captured her opening up about these darkest moments. "I was taking my own life and I was saved by a miracle," she revealed. And in another moment she confessed, "Every morning I wake up and I am sad." Breast cancer struck in 1984, and rather than undergo chemotherapy, she chose radiation therapy and recovered by 1986. But here's the thing, the physical battles were really just reflections of much deeper psychological ones that she carried with her constantly. Honesty about her fears came through in her words. "I feared I might end up dying young like Marilyn Monroe or withering away in public view like Rita Hayworth," she admitted. But something shifted for Bardot after walking away from acting in 1973. Instead of disappearing into obscurity like many expected, she redirected every ounce of her energy towards something that would consume the rest of her life, which was animal rights. One statement she made captures the transformation perfectly. "I gave my youth and beauty to men, but now I offer my wisdom and experience to animals." At age 52, in 1986, Brigitte Bardot established the Brigitte Bardot Foundation, and the way she funded it tells you everything. All her jewelry went to auction, every single piece, along with all her personal possessions, and that single action raised approximately $837,000. That was her investment in animals, pure and simple. Recognition as an organization of public utility by the French government came in 1992, and by the time of her death, operations spanned 70 countries. About 300 staff members worked for the foundation, supported by 70,000 donors, and 4 sanctuaries across France housed over 7,000 animals. What did the foundation actually accomplish in all these countries and locations? The scope was staggering. Spay and neuter programs received funding across the world, and in one program in Sikkim alone, they funded over 16,000 dog and cat sterilizations. That same program vaccinated 29,000 animals against rabies, which meant an 85% reduction in human rabies cases in the region. Individual elephants got rescued from inappropriate captivity. Bear sanctuaries were created in Bulgaria, and campaigns targeted bullfighting, foie gras production, the fur trade, and long-distance livestock transport. Battles against poaching continued, and opposition to whaling operations spread around the world. Bardot herself embodied this mission every single day. Her Saint-Tropez home, called La Madrague, which she'd acquired back in 1958, housed over 50 animals including dogs, cats, donkeys, pigs, sheep, goats, geese, and turtles. By the end of her life, reports suggest more than 200 dogs lived at the property alone. 2 other properties expanded her animal rescue work, including La Garrigue, miles away with farm animals, and La Mare Azou, an 8-hectare estate where she'd created an animal sanctuary. How she described herself toward the end says everything. "I'm more animal than human," and every word rang true. The French government awarded her the Legion of Honor in 1985 for her contributions to animal welfare, but Bardot got very specific about what that award represented. The honor was for her animal rights work, not for her film career, and she even corrected the government when they got her career length wrong. "I take this Legion of Honor for my fight in favor of animals," she stated firmly. But here's where the story gets complicated, because the same woman fighting to save the world's animals was also making statements that landed her in serious legal trouble. Between 1997 and 2008, 5 separate convictions for inciting racial hatred piled up. Fines started at €1,500 and escalated to €15,000 by 2008, stemming from statements about immigrants being invaders and opposition to what she called the Islamization of France. Muslim slaughter practices during religious holidays drew her criticism, and in recent years, she called people from the island of Reunion degenerate savages with savage genes, which resulted in a €20,000 fine. Many of these controversial statements appeared in her memoir Initial BB in 1996 and in a book called A Cry in the Silence in 2004. And it wasn't just statements about immigrants that caused problems. Marriage to Bernard Dormal in 1992 tied her to a businessman and former advisor to Jean-Marie Le Pen, who led France's far-right National Front Party. Open support for Le Pen and his movement followed, and she even called Marine Le Pen the Joan of Arc of the 21st century. The result was immediate and devastating. Contributions to her animal foundation dropped by 2/3 after that 1992 marriage, and supporters were absolutely furious with her. When the Me Too movement reached its height in 2018, Bardot weighed in with statements that many found deeply offensive. Women who exposed sexual harassment in Hollywood were hypocritical, ridiculous, and without interest, according to her, and she claimed found that many actresses flirt with producers to get a role, and then when they tell the story afterward, they say they have been harassed. So what we have here is a woman who spent 52 years of her life fighting for animals, genuinely saving tens of thousands of creatures, giving away her fortune to create sanctuaries, and at the same time, a convicted racist who supported far-right politics and dismissed women's experiences of sexual assault. Both things are true, and both sides of Brigitte Bardot existed simultaneously throughout her later life. 4 marriages marked Bardot's personal life. Roger Vadim, the director who made her famous, was her first husband from 1952 to 1957. Jacques Charrière, a French actor and co-star, became her second husband in 1959, and together they had one son named Nicolas Jacques, born in 1960. But here's something painful about that relationship. Her 1996 autobiography contained descriptions of her pregnancy as like a tumor and the object of my misfortune, and she'd attempted to abort it. Custody of her son was given up after his birth, and Nicolas later sued her for invasion of privacy because of these harsh public statements. The relationship improved over time, though, and later in life, regular contact resumed between them. Bernard Dormal, her fourth husband, confirmed they spoke regularly and Nicolas visited annually. Life in Norway with his Norwegian wife Anne-Lene Biekan included 2 daughters, Bardot's granddaughters. October 2025 brought admission to St. John Hospital in Toulon, where 3 weeks passed with surgery for what was described as a serious illness. The foundation never disclosed the specific diagnosis, and real concern about her condition grew. Doctors described her as being in a worrying state when release finally came. La Madrague welcomed her home after that hospitalization, and November brought a brief return to the hospital. But one final time, she made it back to her home and her animals. December 27, 2025, just one day before her death, saw the Brigitte Bardot Foundation post a final video on social media. The footage showed Brigitte gently petting a rescue dog named Urfe, appealing for someone to give the dog a home. That was her last public act in this world, advocating for an animal. Death came on December 28, 2025, at La Madrague at the age of 91, and the cause was never disclosed to the public. When the news broke around the world, leaders responded with tributes. President Emmanuel Macron of France stated, through her films, her voice, her radiant fame, her initials BB, her struggles, her heartfelt passion for animals, and her visage that became Marianne, Brigitte Bardot represented a life of freedom. We grieve for a legend of the century. Ingrid Newkirk, founder of PETA, added, from her rescued pigeons in Saint-Tropez to her beloved dogs, PETA will miss Brigitte, an angel for animals who went to bat and to court to protect them all.